Thank you. Thank you, the ISDN family, for inviting me, for having me here. I'm really honored. I'm really, really honored and privileged to be amongst all of you. Ravi gave such an amazing, inspiring talk, and what he said, that the world is in such trouble right now. And it is. There is no doubt. I mean, for somebody like me who's been seeing developments in the world for the last 35 years, actively working, I do believe that we've reached sort of a point which has never been seen before. We have extreme fear, insecurity, marginalization, growing inequality, and therefore the growth also of extremely strong, so-called strong leaders who are ruling different parts of the world and are exacerbating that sense of tension and fear that is happening. But all that Ravi said, and when he was speaking, I was like sitting there and saying, yes, we're in trouble. And then came the ceremony where all of you came up on the stage, and one by one, I was asked to give out the certificates. And I have to say, Ravi, I think the world is going to be a much better place. So, from all of us, we are definitely leaving, and I think with some amount of humility, we need to accept the fact that we are leaving behind a fairly complicated, some better, but for the large part, a fairly fearful, insecure world. But when I saw all your faces and I saw the determination, the passion, the commitment, with each one of you walking up on the stage, it was clear that there is definitely change is possible. And I think that's really with the commitment with which we need to go out into this rather complicated world that we are all inheriting. And the only real message that I want to leave behind with all of you is the fact that in your journey, be very clear that in the development field, there are two big issues that we need to keep in mind. One, that it's not going to be easy. That is a fundamental rule of what we have found in the many years that we work. In fact, with my colleagues, I constantly say that you have to be like a dog with a bone. You catch on to something, you don't give up. And that has to be the persistence with which you have to go out in the world. Do not believe that this world is going to be, anything that you do is going to be easy for it to change. But change is possible. And it is possible to make a difference. But that difference comes with the skill that you bring, the knowledge that you bring, the commitment that you bring, the passion that you bring, the principles that you hold dear in your heart. And with that, the persistence that you will have. And I think that's the combination that we have to think about as each day becomes that new battle. The best thing with the world is that it is a battle. And if you're anything like me, you thrive on it. Okay? You have to thrive on the fact that it's not going to be easy. That the battle is going to be contentious. But that you're doing this for the right purpose. And that's what keeps you going. In all that you will do, and you must do, and I think you must do it because of the fact that you are, and we are all such enormously privileged people. We don't have the luxury or the right or anything for us to sit back and pontificate. For us to sit back and say, yeah, things are very bad, and be what is today becoming more and more part of the fashion, which I call the social media activists, which is that you just pour your outrage out and you believe something is going to change. And unfortunately, it's also creating, in my view, a culture in which we don't also keep that, जो हिंदी में कहते हैं, जो मर्यादा होती है, a certain amount of maryada that you don't, that life is difficult, but you don't call each other names. And I think Ravi said it so beautifully, that the phase now is that we do not create more polarization, that we create a phase in which, by listening to the other, and most importantly, by listening to the most impoverished, the people who are not included in the conversations, that we actually build that different world in the future. And this is even more important today than it was many years ago. Because if you think about the world today, one of the key reasons for the enormous strife in the world is because people feel that they are not being heard. There is also this enormous sense that being bad for the planet. So the question is it meat or is it the way you grow the meat? And the question also becomes, how much meat do you eat? And that becomes the complexity of that debate. But today, in this world, we have we have this conversation of what I call the deaf. And it's also a very dumb conversation as a result of it. Okay? Because I know that no Western media house will ever talk to me on the issue of climate justice. They don't want to hear that word because it is inconvenient for them. I had BBC come all the way from London, and I gave them a really hard time, and I said, I don't want to talk to you. I don't talk to any Western media on climate. They persuaded me that they're going to do a sit-down interview on the issue of climate justice, and only on the issue of climate justice. The final, and it was a half an hour, 1 hour, sar kha liya. At the end of it, I was so angry. The film has got a white man, an amazing man, David Attenborough, and me as a brown woman, but there's no word about climate justice. Because it's inconvenient. It's not a conversation anybody wants to have. When you start talking about the fact that when you're looking at climate change, you really have to understand that there is one world, one planet, one atmosphere, and that the rich in the world, including the rich like us, have pumped in greenhouse gases way beyond our share of that global common. And the victims of our excesses are the poor of the world today. Because climate change is definitely happening. That conversation is something that is not part of the dialogue, of the narrative. And it's not part of the narrative because of this enormously polarized conversations that we are having in the world. And so when you go out, I think the most important thing is for you to bring that new conversation, that new narrative on the table. Don't be scared of saying what is the truth. Because that is also part of what we are beginning to do. We are self-censoring ourselves. We are beginning to listen to what others want to hear. And that's what we want, that's what we talk about. And in that way, we are shutting out such large numbers of voices in the world who need the voice to be heard. need the voice, their story to be told. And that's going to be a very big challenge, because it is very tough to stand often against what is the conversation that is the mainstream conversation. But that is going to be part of development professionals' challenge. The other part of it is the fact that, and this really makes me humble when I say it, you know, I started my work in 1980 with a remarkable man, a man who I think was way ahead of his time, a person called Anil Agarwal, who set up CSE, engineer, journalist, but wanted to create an institution which would bridge the gap between the academics and the media world. Essentially, create an institution which would be able to say it as it is, but use its knowledge very forcefully to drive change. In the 80s, when we started talking about environment, the conversation was trees. And yet, as you discuss trees and you discuss the Chipko movement, it became very clear that the women of these poor villages were not talking about tree protection in the way the middle class environmentalists of the world talk about it. They were talking about their right to self-determination. They were talking about the politics that makes it for what kind of local governance systems would allow them to have the right over their natural resources. What kind of institutions would we build which would give people not just the voice, but also the rights? And the reason I'm so humble is that in all the work that we have done subsequently, whether it's been the report that I did for the Prime Minister on tiger conservation, my central message, our central message was that if you do conservation on the backs of the very poor of this country, your tiger will not survive. If you look at a map of India, it is a very interesting geography, a very interesting cartography, where you essentially have large parts of India, central India, East India, Northeast India, which is very rich in forests. That's where also the wealth of India is. That's where our water comes from. That's where our minerals are found. That's where the tigers roam. And yet it's that same area of India where the very poor of India live. It's a match. Put those districts where the forests are and superimpose on them where the intense poverty of this country is. It's a match. Which means that our ability to be able to use natural resources to build livelihoods of very poor people is at the core of the debate. And that then gives you an idea of why we need that conversation on inclusiveness. Why we need the conversation to say that this is not about us versus them. It is about all. And I'll bring it home to you. All of you, I know you've been in Noida, but that's part of NCR. You suffer the same air pollution that is bad in this region. Yet if you look at the context of air pollution, the fact is, and this is where air pollution is very different from the issue of water pollution. I mean, our rivers are dying, but frankly, none of us care. I mean, Yamuna's dissolved oxygen level is 0, which means that it is technically dead. It is scientifically dead. If your dissolved oxygen level is 0, a water body is dead. Only thing is, Yamuna has not been officially cremated, but it is dead. But honestly, it doesn't really bother us. I'm sure all of you go over the Yamuna, going to Noida. बहुत बुरी लगती है. क्या फर्क पड़ता है? पानी तो हमें यही मिलेगा ना. बोतल बंद मिलेगा या अच्छा अच्छा, जो बहुत अच्छी बात है. Wonderful. that I can drink it. Because if it was bottle band, I have a principle, I don't drink it.
It's an ISDM principle as well.
Good. Good. But if you look at air pollution, the fact is this is where it is different. I remember when we were getting really agitated and we weren't getting our voice heard on air pollution. We bought a little handheld monitor and we decided to give it to the most powerful, powerful people, not rich, powerful people, influential people of the city. And we found that the air pollution level was as high in Lodi Garden as it was in other parts of the city. And it was very clear that you can be rich, you can be poor, but pollution is going to affect you. It's a great leveler. And the question that I keep getting asked in winter particularly is which air purifier to buy. And I keep saying, khareed lo, jaun sa bhi khareedna hai, because we will not CSC doesn't do any commercial work, so we will also not associate ourselves with any commercial product, but buy whichever one. But the fact is, whichever one you buy, you're going to have to breathe. And when you breathe, if it's toxic, and as toxic as it is, you're going to be affected. Now, if it is such a great leveler, then the fact also is that you will have to build policies for air pollution which take care of both the rich, but also, most importantly, the poor. Today in the city, we have 26% of our land area is under roads and flyovers, 26%. It's roughly equal to how much area is under green area in this city. 90% of that road area, 90% is occupied by individual owned vehicles. Those 90% vehicles add to the pollution and the congestion which we all suffer. But the fact is, 90% of the road space is taken up, but the number of people who drive are not more than 20%. Which means that you are talking about creating road space and airshed space for the remaining 80%. And that's not possible. So you have to reinvent what we call mobility in the interests of all. If we don't have a bus, metro, cycle, walk system which can work for the rich, it will never work for the poor. That's the scale of transformation that we have to work towards if you care about air. And I can give you this instance after each area of work will tell you the same principle. You don't work to create the right option for the most marginalized, for the poorest, and what will work for the rich as well. If it's not inclusive, it will not work. My favorite example, and I will not bore you with it, is about shit. Okay? I do a lot of work on excreta. And I can tell you that if you don't have a sanitation system which is affordable for the poorest, your rivers will continue to die. And I think that's really where I want to leave you all, with that message that it is very clear, and this is why it's wonderful to have an organization like ISDN. Because for too long, development management has been seen in the same prism as management. But management is often valueless. It doesn't have the principles that need to drive the institutions. And yet institutions which are determined that they are going to drive change cannot be soulless. They cannot be without principles and without values of societal justice. So it is critical, and I would like to congratulate all the founders of ISDN for thinking about this, because it is critical that the values, the politics of inclusiveness, the politics of justice, the politics of inequality, of power, must become central to our conversation. For too long, we have believed that we can neuter the politics, that we can get rid of the politics, we can be technocrats, we can solve problems. But that's where I want to leave you with Ravi's very strong message. The world is today at a stage where you are the most privileged because you know we have messed it up. Which means that what you can do is totally different. If you follow and if you make your mind into the cabbages that you are required to be and say, this path has already been written for me and I'm going to do it, then you are one group of people who actually have the privilege of looking back, looking forward and saying, but it didn't work. I need and must do things differently. So you can think out of the box, you can think without a box. So you are absolutely, in my view, perfectly ready to go out there and to fix all the problems that we are leaving for you. But congratulations. But congratulations once again, and in all seriousness, we haven't left behind such a mess. There is a lot to do, and that we need to be very clear that we can make the change that we work on. Thank you very much.